Hello, and welcome to our webinar. The title of our webinar today is DFMA and Inflation, Mastering Cost-Effective Design for Long-Term Success. Those of you who attended this webinar live might recall that we had some significant audio issues, and so this is actually a re-recording of that webinar, and you will notice some differences. My name is Tsai. I'm the Director of DFMA Implementation Services for Boothroyd Dewhurst. I've been in industry for something on the order of 30 or 35 years, working as a mechanical manufacturing engineer in a number of roles. 21 years with Eastman Kodak Company, ranging in roles from jigs and fixtures and product design through manufacturing engineering, quality engineering. I was a Lean Six Sigma instructor, subject matter expert, globalization manager, etc., etc. There are several products shown on this slide that were products that I worked on. For the bulk of my career, I have been working on low production volume, high mix, typically products that were leading edge or bleeding edge kinds of technologies. It was a blessing to work at Kodak. It was a great company to work for back in the day. Long about 1990, Kodak had some issues that I'll talk about as part of this webinar. And as a result of those issues, I became the designated corporate subject matter expert in DFMA, starting in roughly 1991 through the time that I left in 2006. And I've been with Boothroyd Dewhurst since 2011. Now, the objective of this webinar is for me to share some of my experiences and best practices as it pertains to implementing DFMA into a corporate culture. And in fact, as I mentioned, that's my role. I work with companies to learn about DFMA and to figure out how to implement DFMA into their corporate culture. So before we get into the kind of the content, let's set context a little bit. So here's my hypothesis of where we are today. We've lived through basically 3 years of this pandemic, getting shut down, having to work from home, et cetera, and this has induced some significant supply chain issues for most companies, ranging from lack of availability to delays in receipt, certainly increases in costs. Lead times have shifted from weeks to months to, in some cases, years. And then the geopolitical unrest is certainly not helping the situation. That's obviously going to be adding additional cost pressure to those supply chain issues. With the shutdowns, people got used to working at home, and so many companies now have gone through kind of a change in the ecosystem of their office workplace. You've got a number of people who are working either hybrid schedules or remote, and in some cases software companies, for example, have actually gotten rid of their brick and mortar and gone 100% remote. And I'm fairly convinced that there's a productivity, effectiveness, problem-solving impact on companies that are changing up that ecosystem. Some companies, in response to the supply chain issues, have started reshoring and nearshoring initiatives. According to Harry Mosier, we are experiencing some of the highest rates of reshoring and nearshoring, bringing manufacturing work back to this country. But I've also heard, as I'm sure many of you have, that there are resource and talent issues. Finding people who want to work, finding people who are reliable, and critically, finding people with the right skills. So for example, welding, finding young people who are going into the welding trade is very, very difficult, and everybody's competing over the same resources. Last couple of years, no doubt, everybody knows we've been feeling these inflationary pressures. We're now at roughly 5% Fed rate. And you take all of this stuff that's going on in the world and you add it to what is normal for most companies that I'm involved with, which is their new product development programs are late to market and frequently over budget. And additionally, in many cases, the production costs of those products are higher than desired. So their business cases aren't quite what they were hoping for. So operations managers, executives throughout industry, it's my hypothesis anyway, that they are all feeling the same pressure, pretty intense pressure right now to drive productivity and process improvements in order to yield a much more cost-effective operation and to up profitability. So as I mentioned, this is a second time recording of this webinar. During the webinar, we did a poll, and so I'm going to share with you the results of the poll. There were somewhere on the order of 150 people online, and so the poll was, of these current state conditions, which of those are you experiencing yourself in your company? And you can see the results here. The vast majority of people are experiencing supply chain issues, both cost and availability issues, and better than half are experiencing new product development that's late and over budget. But obviously, as you can see, the other challenges, industrial challenges, are being felt by others that were on this webinar. So my take from this is that the vast majority of people align with the challenges in front of us today, which is really, again, driving productivity and cost effectiveness into our operations. So let me scroll back time a little bit, roughly 30 years here, back to 1990, and explain to you the situation that we were in at Kodak. In 1990, Kodak was the number 3 recognized brand globally behind Mercedes and Sony. So we were king of the hill in terms of film-based imaging and related products and technologies. We were a technology push company. On an annual basis, we were in the top 5 in terms of patent producing companies. Commonly in battle with companies like 3M and Xerox. And we would take these ideas and these new technologies, new capabilities, and push them out to our customers. And in most cases, that worked out pretty well. We were a matrixed organization. So there were, at one point, 11 lines of business and something like 6 or 7 support organizations. Profit and loss aligned with the lines of business, and as did the design resources. So the lines of business had control over their business destiny, if you will. In 1990, we were in an economic recession. The Fed rate at that time was roughly 7%. And for Kodak, in 89 and 90, we had experienced several major new program launch failures. In particular, one copier program had a mean time between service calls of 1 day. We were sending in service technicians to every installed site, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day. To top it all off, in roughly 1986, Steve Sasson, who's pictured there, invented the digital camera. And so our cash cow that was film was going to come to an end. We knew it. We saw it coming. And so when you take all of this and tack it on top of a habitually late and over budget new product development program and products that were commonly way too expensive to produce, we had some challenges in front of us. Now, truth be told, for better than 20 years leading up to 1990, we had a history of developing hardware equipment in support of film products, film and paper and chemical products. And it was the razor blade scenario, right? So we made all of our profits on the commodities, on the consumables, and so there wasn't a lot of cost pressure on the equipment. Well, obviously this all needed to change. With digital imaging, there was no, would be no consumable, no recurring income, and so we knew that we had to modify our product development approach to be much faster, much more predictable, so shorter in duration, and yielding cost-effective designs that had a net positive gross margin in and of themselves, and be customer-focused. Fundamentally, we had to figure out a way to shift Kodak from being a chemical company to being a consumer electronics company. Tall challenge, I think you might agree. So we were lucky enough to be able to spend a significant amount of time with Don Clausing, who's pictured in the bottom left of this slide. Don was a former Xerox engineer. He was a adjunct professor at MIT, and he had done a global benchmarking study to understand how the best product developers in the world were developing their product, what made them so good. And what he shared with us allowed us to learn that there were a couple of dozen, easily, engineering product development practices that we were not making use of. We did not incorporate them into our process. We may or may not have had skilled, knowledgeable employees in-house, et cetera, et cetera. But fundamentally, they were not part of our process. Chief among those best practices was DFMA. DFMA, in Don's study, was one of the most ubiquitous engineering product development practices being used in industry, and it was not part of our process. And so DFMA, I like to say, is a venue for concurrent engineering. It thrives on cross-functional, diverse representation on your team. So the greater number of different perspectives you can bring to your team, the better the results. And so DFMA, I view DFMA as a team sport. This is not something that you've got an engineer or a designer sitting in a cube in front of his or her CAD station doing this on their own. No, this is done in a team setting. Now, the initial focus of our efforts was on waste prevention, the application of DFMA in the fuzzy front end of product development, what we today call product simplification and costing. Now, DFMA provides the greatest amount of leverage over product lifecycle cost when applied in that early stage. The downside of that is that you might be months or even years out from realizing the effects of the application of DFMA. And so the other very worthwhile application of DFMA is in productivity improvement or waste reduction, cost reduction. And so you can apply DFMA on a product that is currently in production, drive significant productivity improvement to the manufacturer of that product, and along the way you will also generate a significant number of ideas that can then be applied as part of the next-gen product development effort. And that productivity improvement gain is almost immediately realizable or cashable, right? So you immediately experience the benefits of DFMA. So this is a great way to go. Apply DFMA to products that are currently being produced. You've got access to all of the data in terms of assembly process and costs and things like that. And you can then feed that next product development activity. From all of this work that we did to modify the product development process and that sort of thing, we came to commonly use a couple of key sayings that I think are very applicable to DFMA. The first one is do more engineering. So we referred to our product development process as the do more engineering process, because what we learned from Don Clausing was that the intent was do more of these, apply these best practices, these engineering practices in phases 1 and 2 of the product development process, that fuzzy front end, because you'll solve more problems, you'll make better decisions about the design option to pursue, and when you get into detailed design and manufacturing ramp, because you've solved many of the toughest problems in a time where you had the time to actually engineer them more effectively, the detailed design and manufacturing ramp phases become more of a race, right? You can get there faster, more efficiently, spend less money, and this obviously enhances your predictability in terms of schedule. The other saying that became popular was, and again this ties into all of these practices, was that we needed to be making our design decisions based on data. So we refer to it as data-driven decisions. And again, DFMA, product simplification and costing, helped with that, because we're generating cost data at a very early stage, that fuzzy front end, and able to use that data to make better decisions about our design path, rather than going by gut feel. So for example, material and process for a part. Historically, most engineers will pick a process that they're familiar with and a material that they're familiar with that they believe will meet the functionality. But if you apply product simplification and costing in an effective way, you'll evaluate more than just what you're used to, right? And do a better job of choosing a more optimal material and process solution. And in many cases, the lower cost solution will surprise you, because it violates a historical paradigm. So doing more engineering and making data-driven decisions became a common theme for us at Kodak. These are the key principles associated with DFMA. Now, depending upon where you are in the product development cycle, these key principles may take on greater or lesser importance. So for example, if you're in that fuzzy front end, minimizing part count is the primary thing that you want to focus on. If you're later doing productivity improvement kinds of analyses, the handling and insertion difficulties and Z-axis assembly, minimizing separate operations, these are will tend to be more practically applicable for a product that is currently in production, versus minimizing part count, which can often involve tooling changes and things like that. Now at Kodak in 1990, we had the benefit of using the IBM Pro printer as a key benchmark. The IBM Pro printer was developed over roughly a 2-year period, launched in, I think, May of 1985, into a brand new, fully automated plant located in Charlotte, North Carolina. Now, the IBM team who developed this specifically wanted to keep manufacturing in the U.S. And knew that they had to minimize costs associated with the production of this product. And so they specifically instructed the design community development team to design a product that would be assembled using your thumb and index finger, under the assumption that you are visually impaired. In other words, you are a robot. And they successfully did it. The plant in North Carolina was 100% automated. And if you'd like to see a video of the assembly of this product, you can go to the YouTube site that I've listed there. There's actually a couple of good YouTube videos that tell the story about the IBM Pro printer. So this was kind of a poster child benchmark product for us that helped us understand what was possible with DFMA. Now, the emphasis on cost and why, parts, and why I say that, minimizing parts is so important. Clearly, by reducing part count, you can significantly impact the cost of the material being used and the assembly labor. But there are a host of ripple effect costs that are also impacted by reducing part count. For every part that's in a design, there are drawings, there's tolerance analysis, GD&T. There might be tooling requirements. In today's world, you've got suppliers around on the other side of the planet. There has to be a quality plan, et cetera, et cetera. All of these costs have to be absorbed for every part that's in your design. So here's a key case study for you to consider from Kodak. Most everyone has used one of these. I think even the young people in the room. The Fling 35, the product that you see top left in this slide, was one of the first products that we launched. We launched this in roughly 86 or 87, largely in response to Fuji, who was first to market with their quote-unquote disposable camera. Now, I actually worked on this line as a manufacturing engineering tech as part of my early days. This camera was largely injection molded parts that were snap fit together, 5 directions of assembly, and then the finished camera was stuffed into this fiberboard or paperboard box, which was an awful assembly process. We had significant quality issues with that process step alone, where we would have to remove the camera from the paperboard box and reinstall it into a new or try to reinstall it into a new paperboard box. So in 1990, we took what we had learned from Don Clausing and embarked on a redesign of this product. Oh, by the way, someone in marketing chose to call this the Fling 35. That verb, fling, was an unfortunate choice because the environmentalists crucified us because that implies that we're throwing away this camera, when in fact we were recycling this camera, reusing this camera at a very high rate. So we changed the name on the camera to the Fun Saver, and like I said, in 1990 embarked on a redesign effort. We pulled together a cross-functional team. We socked them away in a secret space in one of our buildings and had them apply all of these new practices that we were learning. And what they came up with was a stellar design. Was launched in 1992. You can see that on the 2 images on the right. And in an 18-month period, not only did we come up with a new design, but we were fully tooled, production tool steel tools to produce this new camera. Nearly all of this camera is reused. I think there are 4 or 5 parts that are recycled, but everything else is reused up to maybe 15 or even 20 times before the remainder of the product is ground up and blended with virgin material. All of the molded parts, including the label, are polystyrene, so very, very recyclable. So this is the sort of thing that could be done. We proved it to ourselves that Don Clausing was correct, and that we needed to adopt these principles in a more habitual way. So if this is something you'd like to take on, I have a couple of suggestions for you in terms of getting started. Now at Kodak, we were a really grassroots kind of company. The engineers and statisticians and chemists would come up with things, and we would push them through in a grassroots kind of way, and that made us, at those levels, pretty independent and energized, right? But I've learned over the years that stakeholder support is pretty key. So that's my first recommendation to you. Start by getting stakeholder buy-in, managers, executives, etc. Make sure they understand the fundamentals of DFMA, the expected benefits and results, aka the value proposition, and then engage them to not only support but be involved in a proof of concept effort to prove to themselves and to everyone that DFMA is indeed valuable. And the way to do that is through a DFMA implementation workshop. These workshops are typically 3 days long, and they are a we do, you do application-based training event. Now, it's not just training. So the we do portion is, we train you in the process, the analytical methodology. We apply it to a sample assembly. And then you go off in small teams and apply this new skill on carefully selected projects so that you can generate a cashable ROI from this workshop. So at the conclusion of these 3 days, you will have analyzed up to 5 projects, generated ideas for potential redesign of those projects, identified the expected benefits of those ideas, and put together recommendations for how to make those changes. Post the workshop, you would then implement those changes, harvest those gains, and share with your stakeholders the return on investment from doing this kind of a DFMA workshop. And typically, the ROI on these workshops is extremely positive. Hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars of projected savings as a result of the design ideas that are generated from the workshop. So here's a case study from a company that I worked with a few years ago. This company was somewhat unique in that they had a revolutionary system that they were working on. This is something that had never been done before. It was new to the world. Their market space is the smart power infrastructure market space. And they had developed a proof of concept model and proved that functionally this thing would work. Now, the chief technology officer was familiar with DFMA, and he knew that he did not want to take this lab model, proof of concept model, and commercialize that. And so he brought me in to work with his team to induce the initial product design. So take that proof of concept design and come up with a product design that was in fact producible. The results of this workshop was a 70% reduction in part count and a 2/3 reduction in size and volume of the system, commensurate 2/3 reduction in the weight of that system. And because this system, the weight of this system is important, it hangs on high tension wires and things like that. By reducing the weight of the system, they actually opened up additional market segments, leading to a projected 10x improvement in revenues. So this is the kind of benefit or impact DFMA can have on the design of your systems. So at this point, we held a second poll. So I'll show you the results of that poll as well. The question on this poll was, how does your company view training? Training could be viewed as kind of a necessary evil, if you will. It's just an expense. Or, on the other end of the spectrum, training could be viewed as a strategic investment, necessary to drive significant improvements in the operational results of your company. And so the participants in the live webinar responded to this poll, and you can see the results here. Roughly 1/3 of the population, 1/3 of the attendees said that their companies viewed training as a strategic investment, which is great news. What was a little bit disappointing is 5% of the respondents said, "What is training?" So in other words, training is kind of, I guess, non-existent in those companies. Sad state of affairs. Combined, we've got another, 40% that say that training is an expense, and that too is a bit disappointing. Companies should be viewing training really as an investment and hopefully as a strategic one. So I would like to see that strategic investment number increase. So hopefully you can see how our DFMA implementation workshop could be viewed as a strategic investment and lead to a commitment to implementing DFMA as a future habit in your company. And so how do you do that? We, as a company, we are kind of a teach-to-fish oriented company, and so we recommend that you establish internal subject matter experts and facilitators in DFMA so that they become your first line of defense, helping teams and engineers apply DFMA to your projects. In order to make sure that DFMA work happens, you should modify your documented business processes to make sure that the hooks are embedded into those processes as reminders that DFMA is important and needs to happen. Most companies these days have some sort of metrics dashboard for tracking product development metrics and monitoring progress. And so obviously there's benefit in incorporating DFMA metrics into that metrics dashboard. Now, the metrics that you use, you need to be a little bit careful. You want to make sure that you are motivating the right behaviors and presenting metrics that are preferably leading rather than lagging. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a coming slide. Since you're trying to learn new habits, it's important to have a continuous feedback and improvement loop. So key to that is a means to document lessons learned. You want to have those postmortem kind of reviews. What went well, what didn't go so well, how can we do things differently in the future? And then share those lessons learned via lunch and learn kinds of meetings. So bring in others so that they can learn from teams who have gone through those applications. You should be publicly recognizing teams and individuals who are taking leadership roles in the application of DFMA. And I think it's important to also provide additional training opportunities to grow skills that are supportive of DFMA. So things like finite element analysis, failure modes and effects analysis, facilitation skills, things like that. One of the recommendations that I have that I consistently make with client companies, is that you create an innovation repository and a process by which you collect ideas and concepts for future use. In fact, the single-use camera, the Fling 35 that I showed you earlier, was in fact a design that was on our quote-unquote shelf, which is how we were able to respond to the Fuji product so quickly. So, through the normal problem-solving and creative process, ideas will be created or generated that may not be immediately applicable. There should be a way to capture those ideas so that they can be referred to in the future and generate value for your company. As with any habit-forming process, it requires repetitive application to kind of build up that muscle memory. If you're familiar or have experienced lean initiatives, they follow this same kind of process, right? You should have a standard cadence in which you execute these workshop events. So once every month and a half, conduct a DFMA workshop to make sure that you are regularly exercising these new practices. We provide two different kinds of workshops: implementation workshops, which are kind of the training plus application kind of workshop that I mentioned earlier. But we also provide what we call a guided analysis workshop, which is a project-specific workshop where we lead a project team through the product simplification and costing process on a specific project. Those workshops take some coordination to execute, and so having standard work associated with those workshops is going to be important in terms of being repeatable and predictable. And as I mentioned or alluded to earlier, we recommend that you start with productivity improvement kinds of activities. So start with a product that's or an assembly that's currently being produced, and analyze that, generate productivity improvement ideas, and execute against those. But then shift left, right? So take the ideas that were generated in that productivity improvement, feed them into a new product development project, and come up with that next gen, really elegant design solution for the next release of that product. Last but not least, constancy of purpose. This is a Demingism. It's the image of the gentleman to the right there. Dr. Deming is famous for basically claiming that the U.S. industry was not good at constancy of purpose, which is why the Japanese were able to come in and kind of establish a leadership position in our auto market. We had, in the U.S., companies had a tendency to kind of jump from one shiny thing to another, right? So, and in doing so, fail to develop those new habits and those new competencies that are important for a cost-effective, robust, long-term industry. And so constancy of purpose is key to long-term DFMA benefit, if you will. So to achieve constancy of purpose, this resides with your stakeholders. Stakeholders need to clearly set expectations for project teams and hold those teams accountable, and continue to do that for months or potentially years until DFMA becomes a core part of your corporate culture. So let's get back to the Kodak case. Mid-90s now. At this point, I am a supervisor. I have a small group of engineers, and we collectively are the subject matter experts providing consulting services and training to engineers and teams in the various lines of business and throughout the company. We had, by this point, re-engineered our product development process to put in the hooks for when DFMA should be applied, the kinds of results to be expected, the metrics to be monitored, etc., etc. And we were organizationally positioned within a large group of manufacturing engineers supporting a multitude of different lines of business. And what we did is we had what were called product manufacturing engineers, PMEs, who were typically individuals who had product development experience, could kind of speak the language of product development teams, and they were the first to be involved with those product development teams. And so we would hand them a laptop with the software on it, and they would be the DFMA leaders to those project teams. We established an intranet site where the software was available, and a host of different job aids were available, one of which you see to the right. And we modified the metrics dashboard, the product development metrics dashboard, to include DFMA metrics that we thought were good metrics to show, good metrics to be leading indicators, and we learned some tough lessons. So one of the things that we did wrong, that I did wrong, was we used a numeric gate deliverable that was the DFA index, and we put targets around that. Initially we said, you wanted to have a DFA index that was double digit, and then we later went on to say that we wanted a DFA index that was 25% or higher. And the problem with that is that the DFMA index is very easy to game, and so it caused some unintended consequences in the application of DFMA, whereby the product development teams weren't really being honest in their application of DFMA. The other kind of problem or mistake that we made is that we were very DFA focused. We focused very heavily on part count reduction, Z-axis assembly, etc. And we relied on our suppliers, our process engineers, to provide the manufacturability feedback at the part level to the designers. Kodak at the time was very vertically integrated. We had almost all of our own manufacturing departments on the floor below us. And the problem here is that the process engineers viewed the designers as their quote-unquote customers. Customers are always right. And so they did not push back on the designers as they should have. And collectively, we did not collect the data, the DFA and cost data that we needed to in order to be data-driven. And so we weren't as successful as we otherwise could have been. And then the other issue that plagued us at Kodak, this is a kind of a corporate culture issue, is the prophet can't preach in his own land problem. Product manufacturing engineers providing guidance to the product development team were often kind of butted to death, if you will. But if we had brought in an outside consultant to say the exact same thing, the design engineers couldn't be fast enough to incorporate those ideas. And so this too, posed a pretty significant challenge for us. So let me share with you a more successful and more recent deployment case study. This comes from a company that is in the electronics or electrical business, I guess, everything from high tension systems to outlets and switches. Their initiative started in late 2017. They established executive level support across all the lines of business, that DFMA was critical to their strategic operation. They contracted us to conduct 5 workshops, training 90 individuals and 3 designated subject matter experts. As you might imagine, by the 4th and 5th workshops, those subject matter experts were supporting teams, facilitating teams, and in fact doing some of the delivering some of the training. The first year projects that were identified amounted to something on the order of 130 designated projects that were going to be implemented. These range from redesigns of subsystems to renegotiation of supply contracts. And the expected yield from those 130 projects was something on the order of $9 million of potential savings. One business unit in that first year executed 6 projects for a $682,000 savings, validated savings, and they had 18 additional projects in queue for an additional estimated $3.4 million in savings. All of these projects were entered into a SharePoint file and viewable via an intranet website, and they had monthly user group meetings to review this SharePoint site, to talk about project execution, project learnings, lessons learned, and to do additional prioritization and execution of new projects. I exchanged emails with the Vice President of Engineering roughly a month ago, and you can see his quote here: DFMA has been baked into our NPD, New Product Development process, for the appropriate projects. So this is a great success story in terms of following some of these best practices and incorporating DFMA into the DNA, if you will, of this company. So this is the sort of thing that is possible. Just to kind of recap what I've shared with you, DFMA for waste prevention and waste reduction should be a very high priority for your company, and using DFMA workshops, application-based workshops, is a great way for building competency in the use of DFMA, but also generating significant cost savings results, cost reduction results. So this leads to strategic investment kind of viewpoint of behind this kind of training. In order to make DFMA a habit, you need to engage your stakeholders such that they clearly set expectations and hold teams accountable against those expectations, and make sure that they have constancy of purpose, that they keep on those expectations, and they continue to monitor results until DFMA becomes a core element of your corporate culture. In support of those efforts, we advise that you create a kind of an infrastructure around DFMA, including the metrics and subject matter experts and process documentation. All of this leading to the idea of doing more engineering early in the product development process, coming up with elegant design options, and using data to make decisions about those designs, leading to long-term success for your business. We are here to help. You can contact me at any time. I can do stakeholder presentations. I can certainly facilitate workshops, help you with train the trainer, etc., etc. So please let us know how we can be of assistance with your DFMA deployment efforts. You can see my contact information here. That concludes this webinar. I hope that this re-recording has met all of your expectations and proven valuable to you, and I hope to hear from you all soon. Take care.